Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Omar Garriott. Omar is the Executive Director for the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology here at the Darden School of Business. And he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, what led him to Darden, and his role as the Executive Director for the Batten Institute, his vision for the Institute, plans for the months ahead, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with Omar Garriott. Omar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
It's great to speak with you. How is everything? How are you doing?
Doing well. I have been through now one full academic cycle. So I think that I now understand this higher ed sector I have entered into at least a little bit better. Although many people have said, hey, you get 5-6 years of runway. So it's going to be a process.
Yeah, how does it feel to now be, okay, you've done a full year, full academic cycle. How does that feel?
It feels like I have, in many ways, just scratched the surface, but it also feels like I know enough now to, really assert a bold vision for the institute that I lead, which we'll talk about, I know, and that. I'm now, I don't know how long of a runway I actually get, for saying, hey, here are the things we should do as an institute until I am actually part of that thing, right? And I can no longer say, hey, why haven't we been, I can't just ask the 5 whys, right? That I actually have to be responsible for seeing through some of these different and newer initiatives, and that I am inevitably and inextricably part of that entity. So I'm really excited about the future for the Batten Institute and for Darden. And so now I feel like I've learned a little bit more in a nuanced sense of how to actually see, drive change within this entity that is just very different than the previous parts of my career. So we can get into that too if you want.
All right. Well, it feels like a good time to have this conversation then, given everything that you just shared. So let's set the stage a little bit here, Omar. Tell us more about who you are and what's your background. What did you do before coming to Darden?
Yeah. Well, I did not work in higher ed. So Brett, you have to teach me everything you know. I graduated from the University of Virginia undergrad, the other business school at UVA, the McIntyre School. And 9/11 happened the fall of my senior year. So I decided to not go into investment banking, which I had done as my internship prior to my 4th year, and instead go do Teach for America. So I taught 3rd grade in the nation's capital. And from there, I went to go work for a social enterprise that was helping low-income kids enroll in college, and got very excited about social entrepreneurship and that whole movement. I wanted to start my own nonprofit, and that was what I wrote my business school essays about. Went to business school on the West Coast just because I had lived my whole life within a 2-hour radius of Northern Virginia. So I figured maybe time to spread my wings a little bit. May or may not have had something to do with the woman I was seeing at the time breaking up with me. But I was like, I'm going to California, and did my MBA out there. And after that, I basically spent the ensuing 15 years working in tech. So I worked at some companies that you might have heard of. First Adobe, then Apple, then LinkedIn, then Salesforce. And then my last job in tech was with Qualtrics. And did all kinds of different things at each of those places, but was able to maintain a through line of serving the education sector that I really love and care about. And then I also, toward in the last few years of that sort of tech tenure, I was able to write a book and start my own sort of side hustle that was focused on serving mostly MBA students. And so this sort of idea of working in higher ed proper was always interesting to me and sort of on the table. The businesses that I helped run at the aforementioned companies were largely selling to higher ed. I was sort of running their education businesses for these different companies, and or launching products into that space, the education space. And so I feel like I knew, both as an entrepreneur and as a sort of corporate cog, I knew something about this buyer, quote unquote, higher ed as a buyer. But being in it has just provided a whole different lens into how the business of higher ed works, how we serve students, and it's just been an education on a whole different level. So I'd always kind of danced around higher ed, and obviously had started my career as a teacher in K-12. But circling back to this opportunity, I thought was a really cool next chapter in my career. The other thing I will say is I just got really burnt out from tech. You get to a certain level where it just becomes all about politics, and you start to look back at your calendar and realize, hey, what did I actually do to drive impact on the things I care about, and or make a deep connection with the people I work with, which can also be very motivating, right? And you start to realize, hey, I've just spent the majority of my last quarter on purely internal things that just didn't really feel satisfying to me at the end of the day when when it's all said and done. And I guess the other thing I'll just say is that I had some real health challenges during the last few years. So I was diagnosed with liver cancer at age 35, and the last 7 years have just kind of been a bit of a challenge in navigating both that and the after effects of that, and the numerous surgeries that I've had, including a live liver donor transplant, which is a pretty rare surgery, and a bunch of residual issues related to that. So this really started to imbue in me a sense of, YOLO, and that I can't mess around with this one precious opportunity I have to make an impact in the world. And which isn't to say I wasn't able to do that in tech, but I started really questioning whether that was true. And one little vignette I'll share is that when I worked at Salesforce, was when I got sick, and the company really supported me, and it was amazing on their part. But when I came back from being in the hospital for the better part of 6 months and was back in the day-to-day of work, my coworkers said that I became less serious, right? They said that I was not as focused on, all of the hardcore business principles that, like a good MBA, I was making sure to employ, right? They were like, you're just nicer. You actually care about us as a person. You're actually okay with a chit chat before a meeting. And I started realizing, like, I've been so obsessed in the first part of my career on what I might call this impact project, right? I've got to really impact, I've got to change the world. I've got to change the organizations I'm a part of, and I got to be that change agent, and, had really big, ambitious goals for myself. Well, what if actually the impact that we end up making, many of us, is more proximate, is more on the people that we're working with day to day, and the people that we're around, and all those interactions we have an opportunity to, imbue with love. And so I started pivoting a little bit away from the impact project and more toward what I call the love project. And that sort of led me to, well, hey, what if I just worked for a place where I was just, part and parcel of the mission? That was me. And there were no questions about kind of, what we're all ambitioning to do here, right? We're all ambitioning to provide the best experience for students. We're all ambitioning to be the best school that we can. I really love and care about University of Virginia as an institution as well. So there's sort of give backy element. And I was just really pleased to find this perfect nexus of a role within the university that I thought I could be a really good fit for, and that there was myriad opportunity to do some cool stuff with. So anyway, long-winded way of giving you a sense of my background and how I ended up here.
Yeah, that's quite a story. I can't say that, but you always hear those kinds of twists and turns. So we ask people, so what did you do before you came to Darden? I want to give you a second to talk about your book. You mentioned that you wrote a book recently published. Tell us a little bit more about your book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm like a pretend academic. So, I wrote a nonfiction book. The book is called Linked. Um, Conquer LinkedIn, Get Your Dream Job, Own Your Future. And it was published by Workman Hachette last May, so a year ago. And it was really born of my experience starting the college and student team at LinkedIn as one of those tech jobs I had, which was probably the peak of my professional career. I feel like I look back on that first year working for LinkedIn when there was like let a thousand flowers bloom phase. The company had just IPO'd, flush with ideas and cash, and we got to build some really cool products for students in colleges. And in that time, I got a pretty nuanced understanding of how LinkedIn could be leveraged for new grads, career starters, even MBAs and mid-career pivoters, right? So it just was clear that this tool was a bit of a mystery to a lot of people in terms of how it could be best utilized, and it has no competitor. I mean, we tend to focus a lot on the resume and things like that, and that's still important, but I see it more as like a box checker to get in the systems of whatever, companies have for their applicant tracking systems. What really is getting people discovered, vetted, ultimately hired, connected in as a referral, which vastly increases your chances of getting hired, is LinkedIn. It is the default platform. It really is synonymous with the job market, right? There's 1 billion members, tens of millions of jobs. 2/3 of recruiters only use LinkedIn to find and vet candidates. 97% of them use LinkedIn to do so. And so it really, this idea for the book really was born of the reality that this thing is misunderstood, underutilized, and is actually, for me, the real passion around it is being able to level the playing field. I see LinkedIn, if you use it properly, as the great opportunity democratizer, because you can puncture any circle that gets you in the door, right? With enough effort, with enough scrap, with enough targeted hustle. And that's really empowering. You don't have to have gone to the best schools or have grown up in a certain community. You can actually create the opportunity for yourself, which we know is a huge function of penetrating some of these circles, right? Up to 80% of the job market is actually a hidden job market where jobs are not actually posted necessarily, or they're posted with a candidate already in mind. And so how do you get in the door sort of before you even need that connection or that specific role, right? Engaging in a non-transactional way. LinkedIn has just made these things so much easier and so much more scalable. And so this was actually also a side hustle that I had, running a training business for all the top MBA programs, as well as just job seekers writ large, around how to make the most of LinkedIn in both your profile and your presence, but also in your network. And that turned into a pretty great lifestyle business that ended up selling recently to my co-founders, because I didn't want to have a conflict of interest working for a top business school now. And so the book, the startup, all of that sort of dovetailed together. And I love that I get to still work with students in this current role I'm in, and share with them some of the strategies. So anyway, check out the book if you're interested. It is ostensibly about LinkedIn as sort of the through line, but there really are more time-tested, higher level job search strategies that really are the focus of the book, right? So how do you build both a broad and selective network? How do you tell your professional story? And yes, how do you do that in a way that cuts through the clutter of what we know recruiters are searching for, what the algorithm prioritizes in search results, et cetera? How to prepare for your interviews, right? How to basically position yourself as a candidate, how to distill what you want to go after next, because there's so much value you get from being clear and focused on that, as opposed to trying to check every box and just keyword stuff. And so these are broader job search and even self-exploration strategies that I try to outline in the book, with LinkedIn as sort of the tactical, okay, here's how you then go do that, where that needs to show up. So yeah, thanks for giving me a second to talk about it. It was a labor of love. It was really challenging to do while I had full-time jobs in tech, but it's nice at the end of the day to say, hey, I put something new out there in the world.
And it's clearly something that you have passion for. You can hear it in the way that you tell your story. So you mentioned you had an extensive career in technology, looking for something that has more impact, really kind of works with educational clients and higher ed, perhaps being a landing place. What attracted you to the executive director of the Batten Institute role?
Yeah, so for the last 8 months, I've been in this role as the executive director of the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology. That's a mouthful, but I was very attracted to. First of all, I knew I wanted to work in a business school. If I was going to go into higher ed, it had to be a business school. Um, Ideally, an MBA, a program that serves MBAs in all their formats. Um, though I love my undergraduate business school. I had just worked with MBAs so much. I feel like I really love the what I would call not yet exec, like age and stage of people's careers. I'd done a lot of coaching. I was also a career counselor for UC Berkeley, Haas, as well as for UVA undergrads. And I just really love this idea of like, you've done a few things, but the world is still your oyster. Maybe you kind of fell into whatever job you had after undergrad, but you can come to a top business school like Darden and have many more doors opened. And I think that's in many ways the job of a top business school. So like going through that exploration process with people at this age and stage is just really excited me. So I wanted to work with MBAs. I also just thought this particular role and the charter of the Batten Institute was really exciting. So this is an institute that has existed for about 25 years and is by all measures, one of, if not the very largest entrepreneurship center in the country, if not the world. And so at the time, and for many years, it still was the largest gift that UVA had ever had to set up the Batten Institute in 1999, a $60 million gift to focus on entrepreneurship, to focus on research, to focus on improving the student experience around making Darden a global leader in the innovation economy. And Frank Batten Sr., who made the gift, was prescient. If you look back at some of what he talked about around the gift, right, talking about how technology is going to disrupt everything, how DC is a real hub for this activity, which I think UVA has laid claim to, especially in some of our other formats. I know you're sitting up there right now, and that. Frank Batten Sr. said something about how the leaders of the new economy, the global leaders, are going to be those who can take an entrepreneurial spirit and mindset to their work. And I really found that to be true in my 15-year career in tech, right? It was not the people who sort of wanted to preserve the status quo and, yeah, maybe were really good at their jobs, but were unable to think really creatively and innovatively about what was possible. It was not those people who were moving up the ladder and being rewarded and getting more responsibility. And, I would go so far as to say, like, really enjoyed their work, right? It's the people who can push the envelope, can understand how the levers of change need to be activated. You're not necessarily just going scorched earth and saying this is the way things need to be, right? It's the entrepreneur skill set of like, how do you build a coalition? How do you get customers and reference those for other, whether it's internal, external customers? How do you build sort of power, credibility, and and again, be able to take a new viewpoint that is probably missing in a lot of corporate offices, right? That is what excited me about being able to work in that sector, and I just saw it time and time again where people were able to say, "Hey, what about blank? Hey, have we considered blank?" Right? And really, the innovator's dilemma, this sort of idea that you can get when you're successful, you can get stuck in your success and not necessarily be able to disrupt yourself. that is so real every day in the tech world, which we're seeing obviously is being disrupted in many ways constantly. Um, and so it kind of forces you to stay on your toes. It forces you to think about good design thinking and making sure that you really have a market for the things that you're wanting to launch, and making sure that you're staying innovative and not complacent. And so I just like really started to believe in that mindset. I personally think my career, I tried to navigate my career accordingly. And I saw in the Batten Institute an entity that had existed for many years, focusing on not just entrepreneurship in all of its forms, founder, joiner, investor, entrepreneur through acquisition, the sort of search fund idea, but also entrepreneurial mindset, right? How do you build this skill set that is really what I believe is required of leaders in the future? And so, we run like these amazing venture programs. We support faculty. We give huge scholarships. We can talk about all this, but we also have just in the entrepreneurship lane, but we also have other things that we're increasingly focused on that I think will, in future iterations of the Institute, be able to touch many more students than sort of just those that are hardcore founders or wannabe founders. The interesting thing that I've learned is that the average age of a successful entrepreneur is 42, right? And if you look at the top like 1% of companies, it's age 45, right? So a lot of what we're trying to do with entrepreneurs in an MBA or an EMBA program or a part-time program, these are first and foremost about the educational experience that this can provide and the career value, right? I come from a world in Silicon Valley where having started something, no matter what happens to the thing, is a badge of honor. It makes you employable, right? It's like, oh, I respect that, right? But how do you imbue some of these principles to a broader audience, I think is really the question for me. And knowing that you are going to get career cachet and a learning experience at Darden that will benefit you in the future in untold ways, and knowing that probably for many people, it's not going to be as, necessarily a successful venture that is the output of our programs immediately upon graduation. It is something that you will return to if and when the time is right in your career. You've done what you need to do with maybe a first chapter. For many people, you've made some money, you've made some connections in the industry that you want to disrupt that can really help, not just hone, but land your idea. And so I'm just really excited about broadening the Batten Institute's focus from just the residential MBAs, because we're located here in Charlottesville, to groups that are like the EMBAs, who are a bit more advanced in their career, more likely to go the entrepreneurial path, and also thinking about how we can activate and support our many amazing tens of thousands of Darden alumni who want to ultimately go down this path. And that's just in the entrepreneurial path. I won't get ahead of myself and talk about all the other pathways, but make a long story short, I really got excited about Batten's mission, encompassing of a lot of the things that I've done in terms of entrepreneurship and tech, and then sort of corporate innovation. I see myself as an entrepreneur in many ways, because I was not part of these like really bloated big corporate teams. I was like, don't look at my background and think I'm a big company person. I did work for big-ish companies, but I was always purposeful in taking jobs that were kind of these nascent groups within these companies who were trying to grow, trying to do new things, trying to launch new products. And it's really that stage that I really loved, right? When things got really red tapey and processy, I tended to lose some interest. So I was kind of like the startup person within these bigger companies focused on the education vertical. And so I got really attracted to that, sort of philosophy at Batten, and also just this idea that entrepreneurship is a key skill set no matter what you go on to do, and that we could be the purveyors of that skill set and that education while you're here. I think it's leadership.
Well, it's really interesting to hear. I mean, I know from talking with our executive MBA students, a number of them have an entrepreneurial interest or just kind of interested in the skill set. Or
Hmm.
there's also it feels like it's been on the rise within our executive MBA program, this interest in entrepreneurship through acquisition. You start to hear
Hmm.
more of that. I know we've also seen early on for our part-time students, we've seen a number of students express interest in entrepreneurship as well. Obviously, you have full-time students too. So it feels like there's starting to be some of an uptick in interest here
Hmm.
across all of our programs. It's always been there, but as you noted, that's just one thing that the Batten Institute does. So, do you want to share a little bit more about also how innovation and technology fit into this vision?
Yeah, totally. And just real quick on in the entrepreneurship lane, I will say that that interest definitely gets peaked over time as you evolve in your career, right? And so it makes sense that we would see that with some of the other groups, the other programs within Darden. Um, and also when the economy is sort of like, tricky to decipher, you also see an uptick in these kinds of things. I actually think it's a great time to start a company. A lot of people are saying the opposite because purse strings are being tightened and things like that. But if you have an idea right now, people have taken investors have become so cautious and wary that they're not actually supporting ventures on the level that they're used to, and I think they're much more approachable right now. Just the volume has decreased so much. So it's kind of like when the stock market is down, becomes a stock picker's market. Go for it, go for it. And I never think there's a bad time, but I also think it's really valuable to pursue something that you're passionate about, a problem that you need to solve in the world when you're in this crucible of an MBA program, right? There's no time like this in your entire life. For me, I look at it as like it helped me get through my quarter life crisis. But you'll never have an opportunity like this, not to like heighten the pressure, because Darden is a very rigorous program where there's a lot to do and a lot of demands, and we want to prepare you. And I think we prepare you better than almost any other school for any sector. But if you can get that entrepreneurial sort of foundation laid here, and then the Batten Institute can help you over your lifetime, reconnect to some of those principles, reconnect to the network, reconnect maybe even to funding opportunities, you'll be so much better off. And it may or may not, likely will not be the idea that you've worked in massage while you're here, but having gone through that added that entrepreneurial crucible to the academic crucible of Darden, I think is just going to serve you well if you can invest the extra time. So anyway, I just want to say I'm entrepreneurship. Yeah, the Batten Institute also encompasses sort of innovation and tech. Innovation, I guess I would define as more of a skill set than necessarily like a career sector that you're going to go into, right? There aren't that many jobs in innovation per se. But it's a mindset that we want every Darden student to have. And my challenge to the Batten team is, how can we proactively impact every student, right? And that is not just going to be those who are founders or potential founders, or even going through things like entrepreneurship through acquisition or VC, right? It's going to be in how you inculcate this mindset that, again, is leadership in whatever sector you go into. And then tech is a really important sector of our economy that obviously I have direct experience in. But when you think about where the innovation skill set can be most quickly and readily and obviously applied, it would be tech, right? An industry that's being disrupted constantly, as I mentioned. And so what I have seen since I have been at Darden is we place, a fifth to maybe even a quarter in different programs of our grads into the tech sector. And we have a real critical mass at a lot of great companies, early stage, small tech, big tech, medium tech. And we also need to increase the focus of the school on this sector. I want Darden to be more strongly known as a school, not just for entrepreneurs, but for people who want to be in tech. And that is, I feel like there is a lot of opportunity still for Darden to do that. I think we have been so successful at getting our grads into that space, but how we use that alumni community that really is a critical mass at pretty much any place you might want to be, what we ask of them, how we engage, additional tiers and types of companies. It's been a bit of a fragmented effort across different programs and functions at Darden. And I won't bore you with the bureaucracy of higher ed, but I have started in the past 6 months convening a cross-functional, cross-departmental group to talk about what we want to do with tech at Darden. How can we create some shared targets? How do we create some programs that we want to run more regularly? What kinds of things do students need to be exposed to at what point in the journey? And how we sort of create a really strong, viable, sustainable current in tech that is, just as strong over time as some of the other career currents that you probably know better than me. But Darden has its strengths in certain sectors, and to sustain our strength in tech, I think it's going to require pulling some different pieces together and keeping a concerted focus on that. I want students who are passionate about tech or even tech curious to feel like those doors are still open to them as long as possible, rather than feeling like they have to get swept up in necessarily other currents, which sometimes feel like level 5 rapids here at Darden. And so that's sort of what we're ambitioning to do within the tech bucket at the Batten Institute.
Well, your last comments around technology kind of bring me to my next question I was wondering about is, you look forward, look ahead, like what's your vision for what you'd like the Batten Institute to be during your time here? Where would you like to take it?
Yeah. So first thing I'll say is like, I'm 8 months in, but I'm still learning a ton, and I love getting ideas and feedback from everywhere. So Brett, ping me after this. Anybody who's listening to this, current, prospective students, no matter where you sit, I really want to know what you think we could be doing and be doing better that's a service to you. And I would include alumni in that as well. So this vision is all fluid and malleable. I think essentially it boils down to a couple things. One is this increased focus on tech, as I mentioned, right? Bringing all of the different people together who might touch this area and figuring out a coherent, cohesive, future-looking, ambitious strategy for that sector together, and having Batten sort of be a bit in the leadership position around just doing that. As you might know, Brett, even just the exercise of cat herding can be a valuable role and a difficult one, right? But you can envision a whole lot of other programs around tech to not just peak, but sustain student and alumni engagement over time in that space that I'm really excited about. We're going to run a big event for the first time in DC this fall, most likely. Around that, I'm going to run a tech learning series this fall. We're going to stay really close to the Career Center and be helping focus on and help drive career outcomes. And so there'll be a number of other programs, right? Workshops for skill building. Think about anything that's around the curriculum as areas that we can help really drive. So that's a big focus. Another one is in the entrepreneurship lane. Again, not just supporting those who want to solve a problem in the world with their own venture, but how do we enable more pathways for more students, right? How do we wrap our hands around potential joiners, right? How do we help students within Darden match with other potential students across UVA's 13 schools and 22,000 students who might be able to help them with a venture or might have an idea already that they can take to the next level, right? You can envision some really cool pairings of Darden MBAs with engineering students, for example. This idea could also be extended to alumni. How do we get more students substantive experience with early stage companies, whether or not they're going to ultimately go work for them? Again, this is credibility in the career market. It is skill building. So can we, think about classes and some other ideas to get students that project-based exposure? And that's true for both early stage companies as well as tech companies, right? And then also we run some flagship programs in the venturing category for not just Darden, but for UVA. So we're going to continue to do those and figure out how we can optimize those. UVA has an entrepreneurship cup, which many Darden students participate in. You actually get real money to go focus and incubate your idea. We run a summer incubator program. For the first time, we're really extending that to MBAs and other formats. And so how do we provide that service not just to the university, but really ask the question of like, what's in it for Darden students as well? This will be an added focus, mentors, entrepreneurs in residence. We run a conference on ETA. So we've got a lot of great stuff happening in the entrepreneurship bucket. It's just how do we make that more accessible to more students who maybe are founder curious or joiners or just see it as the best educational experience. I concentrated in entrepreneurship during my MBA, and I would argue that it is the best thing you can do when you are in an MBA program. It's the best and most accelerated learning, right? You want to be a general manager or a leader, you're getting exposed to every function. The idea is not necessarily the important thing. It's that you are wrestling with all of what it takes to actually launch something, to put something new into the world, to convince other people of it. You're doing good customer discovery and user-based, research. And these are just transferable skill sets. So, I love when I hear from students who say, yeah, I'm going to be a consultant right now, but the educational experience I had engaging in entrepreneurship activity while I was here is second to none. And I know I will return to this someday, right? And more importantly, it will help me in my role as a consultant, right? It will help me be successful in this next step. And then the third pillar, Brett, that we're going to focus on increasingly is just thought leadership. It's really important to me that, again, Darden be known as a school for innovators. And so how do we, Batten, become that vehicle for that? I think there's a lot that we're doing that we're kind of not really talking about. So it's really exciting to get on here with you and help raise a little bit of visibility to that stuff. We support a ton of amazing faculty. How do we get their perspectives out there into the ether a little bit more? How do we translate them for practitioners and alumni and prospective students either? Can we create a coherent point of view, a Darden point of view on innovation and engage in the conversation a little bit more than we have? I don't know of another school or program where you can get that's giving out dozens of full scholarships for people who have substantive experience as entrepreneurs or as technologists or innovators, and support a whole lot of curricular efforts and extracurriculars, supplementary programs and competitions with real money, and pay you to literally sit with us for a whole summer and nurture and incubate your own idea, right? So a lot of this for me is just sort of telling the story of how much there is going on here at Darden and how much Batten is a crucial part of that.
Yeah, I'm curious about the conference that you mentioned that may happen up here in DC. I recognize that the planning may be in very early formative stages, but tell me more about what this conference is about, the inspiration for it.
Well, there's a couple things. We're going to have one at the end of the fall on the topic of AI. Obviously, a hot topic right now, but we've authored some original content on that topic, working with faculty, and so we're going to launch our AI initiative in DC. Prior to that, we'll be taking some full-time MBAs up to DC to have sort of a tech immersion day. There'll be a whole bunch of sort of like company visits and things. But prior to that, we're envisioning something that may be like a mini case competition or a business hackathon, a hackathon that like business-minded people can participate in that isn't necessarily highly technical, on a hot topic, engaging a bunch of different alumni in different companies to see that, maybe judge it, and facilitate some of those interactions between alumni and students that we know are so critical. And so that's sort of the idea in the October timeframe, is getting some students up there. Part of it also, Brett, is just making sure that the different programs and Darden offices, buildings, don't feel as siloed as sometimes they feel. Like this is, as our dean likes to say, we are not just the University of Charlottesville, right? So we've got this amazing space in DC. We've got obviously a connection to a whole lot more companies, especially in the tech space. How do we just lubricate those connections and have it feel like a fluid experience, have the the DC community feel like part of the community of the full-time program, and vice versa with Charlottesville with the folks that are coming in and out of DC. That's another goal, right? Is to get substantive interaction to happen there. So yeah, you'll see a lot more, I think, out of DC. One last thing I'll mention that we're exploring is in the entrepreneurship lane. One of our most popular classes for founders is a class called Venture Velocity, where you can work on your idea for one semester or two for your entire second year, with mentors, with accountability, with instructors who will guide you through that entire process, who've been entrepreneurs themselves. And we're hopeful to expand that class to the EMBAs either this fall or in the spring after. So we're really serious about creating stronger connections with the other programs. And again, entrepreneurship, if you ask any VC, it's a volume game, right? It's a cross-functional volume game. You have to be planting seeds in as many places as possible. So it just makes so much sense for us to be partnering more closely with the other formats and not just focusing on the students that we have here because they happen to be right in front of us in Charlottesville.
Well, Omar, you shared so much advice, so many things for our listeners to think about, but I wonder if you have a final takeaway, something you would encourage people to consider, a word of advice for them as they consider their own MBA journeys.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is be intentional about it, right? So I always thought of the MBA as having buckets of activity, right? There's the curricular side, which is pretty intensive, at least in your first year at Darden. There's sort of extracurriculars, engaging in clubs and things like that. There's purely social. And then there's maybe the career bucket, right? Networking, exploration. I just think it's really helpful to come in with an intentional mindset of how you want to allocate your time across those buckets. Because I had classmates who, were like, I'm just going to purely go with the social bucket, right? I know that this learning is important, but maybe they saw it more as a stamp of approval than necessarily about the skill set being developed itself. And recognizing that the relationship, like an MBA program, is kind of all about the relationships, and that's your network that will sustain this experience. So you could choose to skew that way. I talked to another alum who really wanted to go work in VC, and because he wanted to do that, and that's a very difficult sector to get into as a full-time job, he spent his 2 years networking. That's all he did, right? I mean, he engaged in the classes. You can get cold called on cases, so you kind of have to do that work. But he chose to really focus on the networking sort of career piece. And so I just think it's good to set that intention and then hold yourself accountable to that over time. Check in every, month or so and say, am I actually doing this the way that I want to do it? Because there are really strong currents in your MBA program. There are things you're going to get swept up into if you're not really being mindful of what do I want to get out of this? And then the other thing I'll say, which is just more of an entrepreneur's approach, is this idea that you just need to try stuff, right? Like I worked in tech, this whole fail fast, fail forward idea. I think it was a Thomas Jefferson quote where he said something like, if you don't know what you should do or what you want to be, just act, right? Action will define and delineate you. And that is why I am so excited to represent sort of an entrepreneurship mindset within a top business school, because I just, again, feel like there's so much educational and professional value in trying some stuff while you're in this crucible, and in developing yourself as a future leader, no matter what it is. So just take some risks, do some things here, play the student card. You get a lot of license to do that, and you have a support system that just doesn't exist in the real world. So I guess that's what I'd say, Brett.
Well, Omar, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk more about your background and, of course, the Batten Institute. Look forward to all the exciting things that are coming up during the summer and fall. We'll have to have you come back to talk more about some of these trips to DC and the upcoming conference.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And people can just check out batten.institute to learn more. And I promise in our next conversation, I'll have a little bit less coffee, so I'll be a little bit less hyper.
And that was my interview with Omar Garriott, Executive Director for the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's Darden, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.